A major story taking place that a lot of the Western media isn't covering is the hundreds of thousands of people that are on strike right now in the UK demanding an end to cuts. Highway workers, ambulances and drivers, nurses, civil servants, along with many unions actually striking in sympathy with them, are monumentally standing against the cuts being made by the Tory government in the UK right now. Drastic cuts are being made by the Tory government to just about everything. Much of it was designed specifically to pay for the bailouts that many very large corporations got during COVID in order to survive the lockdown, or personal protective equipment loans that most of which was never paid back by those same corporations. At the same time, these cuts are being done to be able to fund more of the war machine in Ukraine and Russia. Once again, even the working class is being made to pay for what is essentially an inter-imperialist war. What's really more in the interest of working class people? Having basic services that are properly funded, or fighting Russia? Which one do you think is probably more useful to yourself? I would say probably the services. There are strikes happening in several European countries at the same time. Italy, Greece, and Belgium, they all have worker uprisings that are demanding an end to cuts to pay for the capitalist class, many of them losing very essential services that citizens of those countries need dearly. Of course, as usual, the working class is being portrayed as the enemy in this situation. What's his name? Nadim Zawai, the Tory party chairman, lambasted those who wanted to strike, the railway workers, the nurses, all of them, as being stooges of Putin, because this is a time when the UK needs to be united against the enemy, that is Russia, and that those who are striking at this time are making it difficult for the UK to help Ukraine against Russia. Isn't it amazing that those who caused this war are now turning around and blaming the working class for those conditions? Again, this is a war that we're not vested in. Whether Ukraine wins or Russia wins, it's not in our interest whatsoever. It's an inter-imperialist conflict. And when the system wants to go ahead and push these wars, they blame us for essentially trying to stand up for our democratic rights. In other words, always use some kind of excuse to attack workers, blame workers. Now, the same thing is happening in the U.S. right now. The railway workers rejected a deal, and the so-called progressive elements in the Democratic Party have voted against allowing them to vote. They voted to force them to go back to work. Now, so much for that vote blue no matter who. Now, who'd have thought that a party funded by capitalists act in the interest of capitalists? It's almost as if this was an issue that was already resolved over 100 years ago. That a bourgeois party isn't going, you already know. And if you don't know at this point, you're not trying. Now, returning back to the UK, the new Prime Minister Sunak has not ruled out using essentially force to stop these strikes from happening. They said writing laws to force people back to work is not off the table. At the same time, they are writing anti-strike legislation. So many of those who have gone on strike, once this legislation passes, they would be able to fire those workers for striking and essentially replace them with agency workers. So in other words, take workers that have unions and rights and replace them with workers that don't have either one of those. So it's union busting. And this is the time when that's occurring. This is where they cannot stand an organized working class against the government. And once again, we see very clearly here the contradiction between capital and labor. And that contradiction still exists even within the first world. Even as first world people are fighting for a bigger slice of the imperialist pie, that contradiction is still there. This is one of the points that Mao makes in contradiction, that there are primary and secondary contradictions. This is a secondary contradiction. The primary is imperialism. But all those contradictions are still there. That's not to say that these don't exist anymore, or that they're not somehow relevant. What's important is scientifically understanding from a dialectical materialist standpoint how this system is, which is why third worldists have always pushed the line: revolution in third world, resistance in the first world. That is to say that pushing back against capital in the first world is still important. Pushing back against racism is still important, although that's becoming less effective as a revolutionary tool day by day as it becomes a part of the mainstream establishment. It's not radical anymore to really go along those lines, depending on how far you go. So we see this, no matter what it is that the capitalist class tries to do, no matter how much they try to buy off labor in the first world, they can't do it forever. See, the problem with the tendency of the rate of profit to fall and crisis is that they continue to happen no matter how many times the bourgeoisie claim that they're not going to happen anymore. They simply cannot admit that their system is based on infinite growth, which is not possible. It's going to hit its limits, both physically, with markets, with market shares, access to resources, etc. And we're continuing to see that when they hit that limit, or when they hit that crisis where the government has to bail them out. Imagine that. A government owned by the bourgeoisie serves the bourgeoisie. And who has to pay for it? Of course, it's working class people. Is it higher taxes on the rich? No. They just got a whole ton of tax breaks. It is higher taxes on working class people, a cutting of services that working class people need. So once again, we have to pay for the capitalist class. Imagine that. Capitalism, a system predicated on capital accumulation, prefers and supports capitalists over actual, regular, everyday people. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.